Thank you all for coming today. Everybody knows who I am, right?
Yeah.
I think I should model introduce myself. I'm Leonor Netta, and I'm the Director for Public Interest Programs. I'm honored to be the Director for Public Interest Programs here at Golden Gate. It's my third year at this job, and this is the second time I've done this event. I love tabletop. Standing to my left is my esteemed colleague, Cynthia Chandler, co-founder, Justice Now, former executive director, and current adjunct professor. What, are you teaching social justice and anything else? Soon to take over the universe, though. And we're here to talk about Tabletop, this event that I really, really love. It's one of my favorite events all year. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for everybody, students, administrators, to meet the people who are the key players in the public interest community in our area. It's probably, and I don't know if Cynthia would agree with me on this, probably the one time each year that all of these representatives are in one room together, talking about, just saying hello, how you doing, I haven't seen you in a while, catching up, and the energy in the room is just really exciting in that regard. So I always ask, I have to volunteer for second to do it, so you'll see me on Saturday. But I always ask to do this event because it's so much fun to be here.
Okay, so I view tabletop as kind of a chore. In contrast, a necessary, really important networking chore. Okay, so I've done it for many, many, many years because I have to, and because I think it's really important. And have figured out how to put a smile on my face during it, even when I'm not quite as naturally enthusiastic about it. I've interviewed literally thousands of students at PIPS Day and staff table talk, and also put an enormous amount of thought into who to have placed at the tables and the strategy for what the tables are for from the employer side. I figured I can talk about it from a slightly different angle of how to work it, basically, and what employers should be also.
I thought we'd start off by talking briefly about a couple of logistics. Everybody should know at this point, right? The event's this Saturday.
Really?
Yes. Okay. Starting off with basic square one, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. The Hastings campus, if you haven't been to it, is basically located at 198 McAllister Street at High in San Francisco. There are two buildings. One is on 198 on one side of the street, and the other one is in 200. But the main place where you show up to register is at 198 McAllister. There is parking available. I've heard that it's $9, just so you know. That's the address for it. A couple of things that you want to bear in mind. Registration begins at 8:30. There's also something that I've talked about in the past in orientation events, including the open slot sign-up. That's where you can go to a specific table to sign up for open slots to interview with employers that might still be available. That also opens at 8:30. The tabletop doesn't start until 9:30. For reasons that we will get into later. There are plenty of reasons why you want to show up before 8:30. But for purposes of logistics, these are when these things start.
And parking is one of the reasons you do want to show up early and you need parking, because all the employers have all kinds of stuff that they bring you to the tables, and so they're usually driving, and the lots really fill up. So take that into account.
Absolutely. Basically, four key steps, I think, for tabletop. You need to prepare. You need to take a look at the list, the huge list of organizations that are participating in tabletop, and really get an intimate sense of what it is they do. For those of you who attended the PIPS Day interview panel on Tuesday, one of the things that our panelists mentioned is that it's important to go beyond the website. Oftentimes the website's for the funder, it's not for you. So in order to get a sense of what work they kind of do, if say it's an office that's involved in litigation, you want to research some of the cases that they're involved in, some of the things that they're filing, maybe some of the articles that they've written. Cynthia, do you have other ideas about how to figure out what the organization's doing?
Find out if there's other students from your school who have worked in an organization, talk to them. It's a little bit late now because you're coming right up on PIPS Day. In the future, I certainly fielded calls with folks calling ahead of time to ask if they could talk to basically as a reference. Some of our former interns, we've encouraged people to do that. We usually have a list of former interns who can talk with folks. We try to match people up with people from their schools. So I think that's a great way to learn about organizations and get a feel for what the day-to-day existence is for an intern. So.
Certainly, I mean, if you can put that stuff in your materials when you apply, that's great. But even now, if you were to meet somebody who interned at an office that you're going to be interviewing at on Saturday, you can mention them in the context of the interview. And I think that goes a long way to demonstrate, or in a table talk, it goes a long way to demonstrate that you're continuing to do your homework.
I think, broadly speaking, the more enthusiasm you can show to a public interest employer in particular about their organization, the better off you are. I think most folks who are doing public interest work have an enormous passion for the work that they're doing. They tend to personalize the work that they're doing more so maybe than folks in the corporate world. And they actually take great offense, personal offense, if you're not enthusiastic about the job placement. So the more you can say that, oh, I talked to so-and-so who worked at your office 6 years ago, or oh, I talked to so-and-so in passing, and the more I hear, the more excited I am about your placement, the better off you are. So.
The one question I would encourage you to practice, if you can't practice it with me, practice it with others, is being asked why you want to work at this organization. That's the most critical question. I think demonstrating commitment and passion about the work is one of the most important factors that the employers take into account in considering whether or not they'll invite you back for more interviews or offer you a position. About an hour ago, I understand the PIPSA system sent out interview schedules to everyone. You didn't get your interview schedule, you didn't? Okay. That should be coming today, at the very least. Once you get that interview schedule, though, bear in mind the table talk happens between 9:30 and 12:30. I want you to sort of create your own personal schedule for what the day should look like. You know, when you have your interviews, where you're supposed to be, when, and then know that, well, during this time, given that table talk's happening between 9:30 and 12:30, I'm going to be in the room trying to meet as many people as I can, or talk to the folks that I really care about talking to. And then open interviews. If there's an organization, I'm going to say this again, but if there's an organization about which you're really excited, but you didn't get an interview, you were placed on the wait list, or you never were placed on the wait list and you didn't get off the wait list, doesn't matter. You can show up early on the morning of and try to wait in line to get an interview. And those employers, just because they may not have put you on the wait list or may not have offered you a slot for interview, doesn't mean that they're not interested in hearing from you. They oftentimes, I think, appreciate the enthusiasm of somebody saying, I really do want to meet you. So I really want to take the time to do that.
I've hired people that we dinged for an interview that based on their cover letter, for whatever reason, we thought, okay, this isn't the right match for us. And then the person, aggressively fought to get in and actually get an interview. And then did a great interview, and that made a huge difference. I've also hired people who didn't get the open interview, but the fact that they tried to get an interview slot, and then they tried to get an open interview slot, and then they went to the table at the table talk, and then totally pitched themselves to the person at the table. Ended up getting them an interview. We interviewed them on the side the day after PIPSA, and we hired that person. So I think that, showing your enthusiasm, I mean, honestly, I feel like in this economic environment, any job you want, you need to fight for, okay? And you can't be passive about your experience in law school, you can't be passive about your employment opportunities. If you really want something, fight for it, okay? So that means taking advantage of all these things. And it is very difficult when you're an employer, you get a stack of 200 applications and have only a short period of time to go through them and figure out who you want to rank and who you're going to interview. Errors get made, things get overlooked, and you can't tell who people are fully, so take advantage of the open interview slots and then use table talk to your advantage too.
After you do table talk, and of course after you have a question, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned an employer that you're really enthusiastic about. What about if you just show up and there's open time slots and you sign up for one? Is that not encouraged, or how would that work?
It's absolutely encouraged.
So how would that work in terms of a cover letter? Are you to go and quickly draft one?
If I were you, and there was an organization about which I felt very excited, and I didn't apply, right, because I haven't produced a cover letter for it yet, right? I would have that all set to go in my I'd show up early in the morning up and try to get that open slot. And if I had it, boom, I can have it.
Or are you talking about like you literally hear about an organization right there and you're like, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Let me go see. And woohoo, they actually have an open slot. And ta-da, I'm in it. Okay, so let's say that happens. I think the real challenge for you it would be to be able to articulate what epiphany you have. Okay, more so than spending your time writing something up and trying to get it printed somewhere randomly in a coffee shop or something nearby. I think the thing would be to really focus in on, wow, what just made you become so impassioned about trying to get that open slot and going in with that organization, and I would lead with that going into the interview.
I couldn't agree more. There's a computer lab at Hastings that you can access to do last minute research, and you can print things. But I wouldn't risk creating any material that probably might be riddled with typos because you're doing it on the fly. It's more effective to go in, I think, and communicate. I was just blown away by the things that I heard about your organization.
And then I think then the follow-up, which we're going to talk about next, becomes all the more important because that's when you can write down or write a note to whoever you interviewed or whoever you met at the table or whatever. That's the time for you to actually write something out by email and or in a card and actually say, wow, you know, meeting so-and-so at Table Talk or meeting so-and-so in an interview made me think about all these things. I can't stop thinking about your organization. This is what I think I can contribute to the organization. And I know as an employer, we love those funny little follow-up notes. So, we really do. And it's another chance to show enthusiasm. I think if you're just learning about the organization, or you learn a lot more about it in an interview, or you go to Table Talk and you learn about organization, it makes a lot of sense to follow up in writing afterwards. And that can be a really important opportunity.
And I just wanted to ask, how long after you interviewed people did it take you to know who you wanted to hire and let them know?
Okay, so Justice Now historically has interviewed a lot of people. We're looking, we tend to over-interview, let's say. We're actually looking for people who actually have criminal records, who have family in prison. People don't want to put that in cover letters. So we take little signs that people might be directly impacted by the prison industrial complex in the cover letters and interview all those people trying to seek out who we're looking for to train. So we interview a lot of folks. Sometimes we also have someone doing this similar PIPSA but down south in Southern California at the same time. And so then we have maybe about, I don't know, 40 or more people that have been interviewed in one day. And then the staff then get on the phone, meet with each other, and we pick our top picks right then and there, and we extend offers the same day for our first round. And we historically have given very little time to our first picks to turn around. We found as employers that the process is really competitive among employers too, and everyone's vying for some similar candidates. So we usually only give folks about 4 days to make up their decision. And we will give extensions if people ask for them. That's a whole other thing. If people just miss the deadline, like don't, or change your mind later after accepting and renege on your offer, don't even want to, I don't ever want to work with that person in my professional career ever. Again, look, I'm just putting that out there. Don't do that. It's bad. Bad form. And like really rude. But anyway, so we extend offers and then we have rolling offers. And I would say by the end of 2 weeks after PIPSA is all done. And usually earlier.
And it ranges. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Justice Now's process, but other organizations have different ones. Don't be concerned. If it is a few weeks before the organization gets back to you, that might just be the nature of how their process rolls.
That's true. You should ask employers what their timeline is, and they'll tell you. I'll also say that almost every year we get at least one person who does renege on their acceptance. And so then we'll end up with an open slot maybe 2 months later. And we've hired people much later in the process as a result.
Steve, you have a question?
How do you balance the offers from PIPSA with maybe applications you submitted outside of PIPSA, like in the real world, and they might not get back to you for, I mean, some of them don't have deadlines until February 8th or so, so you probably won't hear back from them until March.
I hope that employers are taking that into account. Probably some of them are not. And what we did at Justice Now is we tried to interview people before PIPSA, so do our outside interviews ahead of time as much as possible. Or we figure on holding a certain number of slots that we won't fill from PIPS Day. And there's a certain number of spots that are for folks from other parts of the country.
And certainly,
What I'm asking though is, let's say I get an offer at PIPS Day and it sounds good, but there's something I apply to outside of PIPS Day that I really want, but I know I won't hear back from that until March.
this happens with some level of frequency. It does.
Yes, it does. And you need to go with your gut and what you really, really want to do. And you need to figure out, and I'm really serious when I say don't renege on offers. So if someone gives you an offer and you say yes to it, and then 2 months later you get this other offer, and you're like, wow, that's really cool, and you go back to the first place and say, sorry, I'm not going to do this after all. It's so not cool on the part of like employers hate that. I mean, hate it, because really what's going on is we're trying to figure out how we can best train people and how we can use our resources and how we can best fit and make a match. And you've made, by doing that, folks have taken the opportunity away from someone else. So
With
it's
that
not good.
said, you just need to manage expectations. So
Yeah.
if you apply for a job with Justice Now, for example, and they tell you it's going to be 4 or 5 days, that's their time frame. And you have to accept or reject from the time. Now, some might have larger time frames. Some you could say, well, I'm still waiting to hear about this other opportunity. It could take me about 2 weeks to hear. Can I have 2 weeks to think about it? And I think if you're upfront with them about it at the moment of offer, then it's okay. The problem is if you keep stringing them along, that's not polite. And certainly once you accept, that's it. Then you essentially tell all the other people who are currently considering you that you've withdrawn your application, you've accepted an offer for a position during the same time. You're done.
I do think it's reasonable to tell an employer, like, hey, I'm waiting to hear back from this place or that place, and I have this much time, and then the employer can let you know whether or not that's reasonable for them or not. And then you can make up your mind. I also want to encourage folks to think about externships. I mean, you're at Golden Gate, which has a really amazing externship program that you can work at lots of organizations throughout the Bay Area or farther away and get units. And so one of the things that we've, as an employer, told folks that have been in that situation with us who are from Golden Gate is like, well, maybe this summer is not the best fit for us to work with each other. We're really excited about you. Would you consider working with us in the fall? And we've had Golden Gate students work with us in the fall. And I think that's something to think about as a student, too. If a student came to me and said, I really think your organization is amazing, and I have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do this unique opportunity to do this other thing that has this different skill set, and I really want what you can offer, could I go there in the fall? Then I'm not going to feel like I'm second fiddle, I'm not going to feel offended. I'm going to think you're a student who's got a wise plan. Do you know what I mean? You're going to sound good, and you could also work with us. So I think that's something to consider too.
Cool. Plenty of time for more questions, but let's get through. I wanted to drill down into a few more of these steps at this point. As we talked about earlier, you want to bring copies of your documents for every Table Talk employer that you want to meet with. If you haven't produced a cover letter resume for them already, produce one and bring that to Table Talk, ready to hand it to them. I think it's probably a good idea to be over-inclusive if you don't know for certain what it is they're looking for, and I've given you the list of all the basic job application materials one could possibly produce at this point. But again, your materials should be tailored and bring multiple copies. In case this also isn't obvious, business attire is the rule. I will be dressed down. I'm actually going to be wearing this awful blue shirt, but that's because I'm staff. And people need to know who to ask to get them coffee. No, I mean, that's my job. But I'm always standing around in this ridiculous blue shirt, and then everybody else is in suits. That's the expectation. Do you have any questions or concerns about that business attire issue? Definitely come and see me.
I want to add to that, which is that, okay, so I have a professional reputation of wearing pretty outlandish shoes and slightly quirky, strange clothing. And that's just my reputation, and that served me really well for what I do. I've taken advantage professionally of being underestimated a lot. I kicked people's butts because they're not working real hard because they're underestimating me. It's all good. And I also help me build rapport with people in women's prisons, and that's what I work with, because they don't get to see bright, shiny, colorful things very much, and I come walking in and they laugh and they feel good. So that works for me. So if someone was coming to interview with me or come to my table, they could wear, and they knew this trait about me, they can probably get away with wearing just about anything, right? So I'm going to be, hey, you're my fellow working person. Okay. Other folks don't necessarily feel that way. And even with my proclivities, I totally have to think about audience with my clothing a lot. So I'm never going to wear things like the shoes I have on today I would never wear into court. Okay? They're like bright and shiny, they sparkle. Okay. I'm not going to wear those into court. I'm not going to do damage to people based on who my audience is, based on what I look like. Okay? So I think that's just something to keep in mind. With that said, I think that it makes a lot of sense to somehow be yourself. Okay? I don't think you have to think about wearing like the corporate blue attire or whatever. You can have something that makes you feel like you and portrays yourself. And I also think that you have to try to think of the like most common denominator in terms of what you're wearing.
You don't want to stand out at this event for this reason. With respect to at least most employers, DAs, attorneys, general. But bring your portfolio, that's always a good thing to have, as I said, and you'll get a name tag that you can fill out at the beginning of the event when you register, but make sure you put your name on it. I think Stephen had his hand up first. Steve.
Just in terms of the documents you need, if you already have your GPA and or class rank on your resume, do you think you need to bring an unofficial transcript as well?
Yeah, I don't often think that the transcript is being it only communicates what your GPA is. It communicates what courses you've taken. And you're lucky to be at a school that, frankly, you've had an elective that you've chosen that I think distinguishes you from a lot of students who are first years at other schools who don't necessarily who haven't necessarily had the same opportunity, and particularly that's true for secondary courses. You've had a host of secondary courses that don't necessarily correspond.
As far as preparation, like bringing your resume and a cover letter you've already written up and everything at Table Talk, I can see how that would be handy if you're really boisterous and you work your way into getting an interview slot. But short of that, I'm not sure. I'm wondering, like, does Table Talk change the way they do it? Because like last year, it was called Meet the Advocates. I feel like maybe 5% of employers would actually accept like a physical resume.
Right.
Like they might, maybe you'd exchange like business cards as a must or something, or like write your name on the list. But I haven't seen them actually accepting physical documents before.
It's interesting. You know, it's not been my experience. I think a good number of folks come from Table Talk. They're not necessarily the executive director or internship coordinator. They're a representative. And the resumes can be really helpful for them if they're meeting 20, 30 students to be able to remember who they were talking about. Now, if you create like a GG or Golden Gate business card, right, with your name on it, there's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't have anything substantive about you to distinguish you from any other student unless you spend a lot of time talking about Golden Gate. And they didn't meet anybody else from Golden Gate. So I think it can be a good calling card, at the very least, a resume. But if they don't accept it, they don't accept it. There's not much that you can lose. I just think that oftentimes in that room, the people in that room collect all that information, and they go back to their employer, their organization, and they all compare notes. So, you know, I met Kayvon, he came to the table, and oh, yeah, I interviewed Kayvon. What do you think? Oh, I liked him. Oh, yeah, I thought he was interesting too. And then they start comparing notes and ideas about it, and sometimes those materials can help jog people's memories.
Yeah, I mean, we've historically had the folks who work the table for us actually collect materials. We wouldn't say no to materials, and in fact, we ask the folks who are working the table if there's anyone that stands out to them, particularly to make notes on it for us, because there may be someone that they think we really should have interviewed that we haven't. So they're totally collecting it and organizing it for the folks who are making those decisions later. I think that my organization and our folks making the decisions historically have found generalized cover letters to be incredibly unuseful. So to the extent that you're not really sure who you're going to meet and what you want to do, and you just want to go see everyone at Table Talk, like a generalized cover letter will probably be useless. What would be more interesting to me would be to have a big sticky tab stuck onto a resume with a note about like, it was great to learn blah, 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 blah. This is so what I'm into, blah, blah, blah. And have that stuck on your resume. Like that would personalize it and jog the person's memory who's meeting with you, who met you at the table better. But again, I just can't overemphasize. Public interest employers tend to really have passion about what they do. And little things like not having a generalized cover letter become insulting, even though they shouldn't, because people personalize their work so much.
Listen, it's not intended to be overwhelming. Listen, if there's 50 employers in a room, I'm going to assume for a minute, maybe you want to talk to all of them, fine. But you're not going to create materials for every single one of those. You're going to choose the ones that you feel the most excited about and produce those materials. And then you're going to just walk the room and see what you find out and do, and find other ways to approach it and make an impact. In other words, triage. That's probably the best advice.
And if you're not ready to work with someone or thinking about working with people over this summer, it makes a lot of sense to go anyway. Again, thinking about working with folks during the year. So a question you could have for all the groups is like, do you take externs? Could I work with you during the summer? And then that would buy you more time, or how you can even think about folks for next summer. This could be part of your research moving into the following year. So I just want to say, like, it doesn't have to be this like earth-shattering, amazing epiphany-like process for this summer and nothing else is ever going to work. I mean, you can kind of work these relationships, and I guess that's why I mean this is a really important networking opportunity. It's a chance to meet folks and learn more, and then that opens up doors for possibilities and relationships into the future.
It's very easy to figure out which organizations are participating in Table Talk. You just go to the PIPSD website, you click on the tab that says Table Talk, and employers, and the list is right there. Again, these aren't links to the actual site, so we'll have to hunt around a little bit to find some information about this site, but I encourage you to do research and look at specifically what their practice areas are. Mission statements, I think, can be somewhat important, and certainly their locations and size. Talking a little bit more about just sort of the placement. As I said earlier, there are 2 Table Talk sessions. Well, Hastings has 2 essential campus codes. One's at 198 McAllister, the other's at 200 McAllister. 198, where you show up to register in the morning, is the location for the Table Talk for public interest employers or nonprofit employers. All the nonprofits are going to be in that one big room at 198 McAllister. The government employers are going to be across the street. And every year I get a question from a student about which employer actually belongs where. By and large, it's not that difficult to figure out. If it's a state AG's office or a public defender or a district attorney, it's going to be in 200 McAllister. Anything that's government, courts. If it's a nonprofit, it's in 198. Usually there's some quasi-governmental agencies who are not quite sure where they go each year. Prisoner Legal Services is one of them. Technically they work with the Sheriff's Department, but Nick just hates being with the government folks, so we just toss him in 198 every year. But generally speaking, that's how those divisions are made. There's sort of, I think there are really sort of 5 tips for success at Table Talk. You really need to, I think, express enthusiasm, as Cynthia said. You need to have a plan and know exactly who you're going to want to talk to. You need to approach the employer with confidence about in yourself, certainly, and your commitment to the work. You need to have some degree of table etiquette, certainly, because there are going to be lots of people coming in and out of the room. And you need to sort of, I think, have an open mind about the kinds of work you might be willing to do this summer. Showing enthusiasm. You want to be excited. I mean, as I've said, as Cynthia said, it's very important to demonstrate commitment. I mean, the folks in this room, many of them have been doing this work for years. And many of them could at any time leave their employers and take jobs making a lot more money doing just about anything they want. Fair to say so? They feel it in their bones, this work. They really, really do. And they want to work with other people who feel this work in their bones. So that's, I think, a really important tip. If you're feeling tired, distracted, I mean, I don't blame you. Many of you will probably wake up at 6:30 in the morning to come down there. You need to find some way to energize yourself.
Yeah, I guess, okay, in a way, you're a salesperson that day, and you're selling yourself, right? And if you're not excited about your product, why the hell should I be? Yeah, I'm just gonna put it that way. Like, if you can't muster up the excitement to say your name, say it with pride, and introduce yourself, and ask some questions, then, like, and that doesn't seem so mind-bogglingly difficult for me on the other end of this, then really, like, I'm immediately what's wrong with this person, right? If you can't pitch yourself. So I think that's the other side of it, is enthusiasm is great for the work that you're showing, but you also want to show enthusiasm and pride in yourself, because that really resonates with people receiving that.
Perhaps goes without saying, but every one of the folks who meet in Table Talk work incredibly hard. Their schedules are insane, and nevertheless, they've taken time out of their Saturdays to meet. So that only underscores, I think, more the importance of showing appreciation and I think respect for the fact that they're there.
I wanted to say, in terms of being interested and not distracted in things, Justice Now historically has had non-attorneys and frequently former interns at our Table Talk booth. We're doing that on purpose so that folks can, we can refer people that we're interviewing back to the booth to talk to folks almost as references for us. So we'll frequently have like people who maybe are younger attorneys, other places who were one of our interns, so they can talk about how they experienced with us, help them do other things. But they also might be other kinds of staff who are not legal staff, but they also might be former interns who are also still in law school. If folks act uninterested in them because they learn that they're not an attorney and start acting sort of classist with them, that's an automatic dig. So everyone at our table, and I'm just saying this because this is how you should treat people in the world, if you act like an elitist, you're going to be treated like you're an elitist, right? Which in the public interest world is not usually being treated very well. So I want to make that, really emphasize that. No matter what position that person has in the organization who's at that booth, they deserve respect also, and they deserve your attention. And so I encourage you to treat people as being worthy, no matter who they are.
So just recently there are people that you've interviewed that you love, and then they went to Table Talk, and the person who met them at Table Talk was there.
Yeah, I mean, we also have non-attorneys doing some of the interviews, and the same thing, if they get attitudinal behaviors or something, we'll want to work with that person. And we're doing that on purpose. So I want you to think about the fact that, like, who organizations are placing to represent them, they're there for a reason. Employers are doing this for a reason and deliberately, too. And so it's important to respect whatever the employer's done and treat people with dignity.
I was just wondering, so I mean, we were talking about like being enthusiastic, like sell yourself to these people for Table Talks and stuff, and make a good impression when you're talking to them. I'm assuming, I mean, there's 9 law schools, so there's going to be 100, 200, 300 students in there. How, I mean, it seems kind of rare that you'd be at the table by yourself and able to get like a one-on-one conversation for a substantial period of time. Is it like 5, 6, 10 people at a table at once and you kind of have to fight for it, or is it like, I'm sure you can't just walk right out?
Well, I think, I would say this is why I think ranking what your interest area might be a good idea. Because I think if you're trying to touch base with all the tables, then you're not going to get those kinds of avenues in with folks. But if you focus on a few tables or organizations, even if it's not folks you want to interview with now, but it's an area that you might be interested in for the future, and you're sort of treating this like an informational thing, then you can hang out and those opportunities eventually happen. Yeah.
And that's not been my experience, at least in the 198 room, which is significantly bigger than the 200 room, that there's a lot of people crowding around the table trying to jockey for attention. That's just not what happens. I look around the room during the entire time, and I see a lot of one-on-one conversations happening. The student on one side of the table, and they're the only student.
And honestly, my experience is most people do Table Talk really badly, and they just kind of come by and grab stuff and run, and they don't actually stay.
They'll say things like, "Can you tell me something about your organization?" And that, I mean, you're just wasting everyone's time.
So I think if you actually show some interest in it and have like some actual real questions pre-planned, like then you actually do get in.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just didn't know the ratio of people to Table Talks.
There's a lot of people, honestly, just whirling around collecting literature and then going away. And so there are a lot of bodies there, but I don't think a lot of people are truly prepared to have a conversation.
Cool.
So tips on exactly how to generate this plan we talked about. I think it's always a good idea, as I said, to know exactly where you want to go and meet with your top employer second. I stand at the front of the room. You'll see me if you come in 198. And one of the things that I do is I make sure that nobody is tired or distracted. I try to raise everybody's energy level. I drink a lot of coffee that morning. And then what I tell people to do is to go to the employer that they really want to talk to second. Because I really want them to take an opportunity to take a lap around the room, see who's there, get a sense of what the energy is like and where they need to be in terms of their energy as they talk to other folks. And it can be a little strange just walking up to a table and talking to somebody behind it. So if you've never done it before, to just, try with some employer that you don't care as much about first and then go to an employer that sounds right.
And if in relationship, you have the actual formal interviews, the order you would want to go, versus like a table talk for a little bit first, and then you interview, or interview first, and then table talk.
I think it largely depends on when your interview is scheduled. I wouldn't necessarily think that should dictate when you go, especially because if your formal interviews end up in the afternoon, you have to do table talk.
I think he means if you want to table talk with the person that you're also interviewing with.
Oh, whether you should do that? You should absolutely.
Right, so should you do it before you interview with them or after?
If you have a choice. Right.
You might have the interview scheduled first thing in the morning.
Right.
And then end up like my 9 video. So.
I think that's, in other words, I think that's what's probably going to dictate that decision more than anything else. And even if you could, ostensibly, like it's right in the middle of the 9:30 to 12:30 slot, and you could choose whether to go first or last, I think you're going to find out that as you walk into the room and just check things out and look around, there's just different energies at different times. There's a lot of people in there, okay, well, I'm going to walk away. Or I see a lot of people not around the employer, I'm going to go and I'm going to come back. And I don't think the employer really cares. What happens is, I think the employer just comes together with all the materials they collected and they evaluate the candidates.
I like the idea of a warm-up meeting also, I just want to say, because your brain is a muscle. People don't necessarily think about it like that, but it really is. And warming up and like talking with someone, you get your brain as a muscle working appropriately. And so probably maybe even like the third interview, you're probably like really on a roll for the third little discussion. So I think it's great to just go up to, I don't even care if it's someone you really need to talk to. Go up to anybody and have a conversation first. Get acclimated and then move on.
Take pity on somebody. Yes.
For the last bullet point, to gather info and not sell yourself, like if you're going to a table that you have some interest in and you want to get their literature, but you want to move on to other tables that you have a bigger interest in, how do you politely go there, do a quick little, hi, I'm interested, I'm going to grab these and go, without seeing, like having the person at the table think you're just wasting their time or you're just grabbing information and leaving? What do you say?
One way to certainly do is wait until another student's talking to them. And seriously, you can just go up to the table and be like, kind of eavesdrop. That's another way. You don't really know what to talk to them about, and you really just want to generate a conversation with them. Walk by the table and eavesdrop with what they're saying, and maybe get a sense of where this organization is going. And seriously, I see students do this.
I'm just a huge fan of transparency
Right.
in general, communication. So if someone said to me, I don't really know much about what you do, that sounds interesting, I'm going to take some literature, I would be like, here, have some. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not, I don't know, that's everybody. Folks could read more.
So, I think it's always important, as I said, to introduce ourselves as we did at the beginning of this. You don't need to have some organized, speech or anything, but you do need to, practice, speaking with confidence. First impressions are important. Make sure that you have, a firm handshake. Someone you need to say more about this.
No, I do think that it should be appropriate what you say your background is. So like, Justice Now is a prison industrial complex abolitionist organization. If someone comes up to me and says, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm this first year law student, I have a background in law enforcement. I'm really interested in blah, blah, blah. They're like, yeah, I think we can go on the other side, I'm just saying, you want to make sure. And the thing that happens a lot with our organization as well, people come up and be like, oh, I'm really interested in domestic violence and prosecuting people. And I'm like, what? We get people out of prison. We're not prosecuting people. So some things just don't make sense. So pick something that's general enough that it makes sense, I guess, or specific enough that it really makes sense.
Sample questions, again, don't simply say, tell me about your organization. You really want to engage with the individual that you're talking to. Just as Michael said at the interview panel on Tuesday, one of the best questions I think to ask somebody is, you know, how long have you been, what was your story? How did you end up with this organization? Because people just love talking about themselves. And it's a really great way to get them to talk and find some way to connect with their alumni like that.
With that said, I think it does make sense to know if there's an organization that you're really, really keen on. Like, I mean, particularly keen on, you want to make the best impression, know who their organizational leadership is, like know who their executive director is. It's a very funny thing for me to get someone to come up to me when I was the executive director and the founding executive director be like, how should you be interested in this organization? Or like, you know, how long have you been with the organization? It's like, oh yeah, I started it, and then they get all awkward and weird. And like, but that's true, right? And it kind of a conversation killer. So that probably happens to other people who are sort of like in the upper leadership of organizations, get those kinds of questions that don't necessarily make a lot of sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Talking points. I think it's important to figure out a couple of things about your identity, your personality, your narrative. I often talk to students a lot about cover letters and the importance of having a narrative in your cover letter, why you want to do this work, why you were destined to do this work without sounding overly cheesy. And I think you do want to communicate something about that narrative to the employer and figure out which of those things you can focus on, and definitely connecting with the organization's mission or the organizational representative in and of, you know, herself. The idea of whether or not there's anything that thinks you do, I think would be important. Asking about their internship program, hiring processes, other things that you might want to talk about.
No, I really do think it makes a lot of sense to actually very specifically ask what the experience is. I mean, it's a rogue question. I mean, we get a lot of like, what is the experience that an intern has over the summer? But the reality is the way that folks get utilized can be much more substantive in some spaces and much more sort of administrative support than others. And it's really good for you all to really know what the organizations truly offer in terms of what your experience will be. It is a legitimate question that employers are prepared to answer, and then that can get the ball going and get you started.
And some employers have this information on their website. The Alameda County DA's office is very explicit about what their internship experience will be like. But most, and they'll expect that you know what it's like, and they'll ask you, what drew you to our internship? But most don't, and so I think it's a pretty good question. Getting business cards, that's key, right? Let's focus on some of the don'ts. You don't instantly ask for a job. Some employers will certainly, if they're just doing table talk, they will say, they will make decisions about interviews at a later stage. And they'll invite you to come to an interview. That has happened. Students have told me that they talked to a person at table talk, they really hit it off, and the person said, well, you know, we don't do formal interviews here, but we are considering transfer for interviews at a later date. We'd like to invite you back. But that's probably the most return you'll get out of table talk. The last 10 minutes of the fair are almost always dead. There's not much happening there. Most of the employers leave, so I wouldn't plan to show up like between the 12 and 12:30 during the time period for the first time. Does that make sense? Yes.
With the business cards, if you have business cards for maybe like a past job or experience or whatnot, but not one for like GD or anything, could you hand those out as well, or is it discouraged?
I'm not as wild about them, and I'm curious to hear Cynthia's advice on this because we haven't discussed this. I'm not as wild about a student having a business card. From my perspective, I get a business card from somebody that I need to stay in touch with. I need to stay in touch with an employer or some kind of fellowship sponsor, and I have a stake in maintaining that connection. I don't think the employer has that same stake at this point with you. And I think your calling card is really your resume. But
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear that some employers didn't want resumes because I prefer that from students back more. And then that gives you your past experience. I think if short of that, if you really just have a card, it's an interesting thing to give out a card with a prior job on it. I think you would want to hand write onto it, like from now a law student at blah, 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 and your current information so that they remember. Else they're going to be like, why do I have this card for this person who works at blah, 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 and it's not going to jog their memory.
we never really have this issue with our students. All of you are so patient and considerate, right? I mean, You're not pushy. You're not going to go up and monopolize any employer's time. It's just not something that I see as an issue with all of you. But it's always helpful, I think, to remind you not to suck up all of the employer's time. Talk to them for a few minutes, make your point, and I think moving on can be helpful. I think it's really important also to have an open mind about employers. I mean, as you say, you walk around this room, there'll be a lot of different organizations, some you've never even heard of, and just go up to them. As Cynthia said, if you feel excited about the organization and what you've heard that they do, just go talk to them.
And again, I think when transparency is okay, it's better to be like, I've really never heard about your organization before. This sounds kind of interesting. Can I hear more about it? Like, let me look at this literature and ask a couple questions. It's a lot better than acting like you understand the organization and you really don't. And the person at the table can figure out very quickly that you are just bullying it through the whole thing.
I want to leave some time for questions, so I just briefly want to go over one more issue regarding interview slots. As I said, they're given out at 8:30. You'll show up at 198, you'll come in, you'll walk through the door, there'll be registration on your right. Then you'll proceed down the hall, and right in front of you will be the table talk for the nonprofit employers. If you go up to the third floor, however, there's a separate table set up to get open slot interviews. They're given out on a first-come, first-served basis starting at 8:30. It is not uncommon for students to come in, register, run down the hall, go up the elevator, and go right to open slot to try to see if they can get it. I'm not going to promise you that if there's an organization about which you're really excited, that there will be an open slot. But if you want to maximize your chances, you want to be there early. I will say that I show up every year at 7:15, usually to do last minute prep and setup. And there's 100 people in line. There's 100 students in line waiting to get into the building. At 7:15, 7:30.
Black Friday.
And then they run in. I was going to say the line for these open interview slots seems to be pretty fierce.
And sometimes, and I don't want you, sometimes there are years where I told students to be there early, and they have showed up, and they got to open slot, and there wasn't anything at the time. Everybody kept their interviews. And then they went back throughout the day, and then there were slots available for things that they were excited about. But it's not necessarily a guarantee about any. Teresa, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I'm interested only in table talk. Should I go early also, or just around 9:30 Monday?
Are you only interested in table talk because you're only interested in an employer that's not doing formal interviews?
Because I already have an internship for the summer, so I just want to talk to them before it's future.
Yes, then I would agree there's no need for you to show up. Because if you already have something for the summer, 98-99% of the employers who are doing formal interviews are just looking at summer. Some are looking for fall, but you can probably figure that out.
So should I go later for the 9:30?
I think, I would say I wouldn't get there earlier than 10 if you're really only doing table talk. You're not at all interested in interviews because the employers are coming in and they're setting their own stuff up. And the folks who are doing table talk are not always doing interviews, and they're not getting there early. So they're getting there right at 9:30 and then they're setting their table up. So they can be kind of chaotic themselves before 10.
Let's see. Do you want to talk about thank you notes? If you have some specific ideas.
So
on that?
I think follow-up, like thank you notes are incredibly important. They make a huge difference. Can't tell you how much it can change an employer's perception of you to get one of these cards. And I think because PIPS Day is such a quick-paced thing for a lot of employers to be making decisions quickly, it makes a lot of sense to send an email very quickly after an interview and or meeting folks at table talk. And I think it could also be followed up with a handwritten note. It's a chance to very specifically say something that you think you maybe didn't handle perfectly in the interview or something you wished you brought up and forgot to bring up. You can bring that up in a note. It's also a way where you can reinforce something about yourself or a point that you really want to make. It's a place to talk about like what you could contribute to the organization and just show enthusiasm that you've been thinking about the organization after. And it can make a huge difference. Like we've had candidates where we were like in, and then we got this note, and we're like, oh, that brings the person up. So it makes a huge difference. And actually getting a physical card in the mail is like such a rare treat that I feel like it's like Santa Claus comes to the office, we're like, oh my gosh, we got a card, and everyone kind of looks. So all the people who are, you know, because the folks who are doing the interviewing end up having a level of camaraderie because they're going through so many resumes together and they're going through this whole process together, you get like a fairly big cohort of staff doing these decisions. And they end up sharing this stuff with each other, and it makes someone stand out when they get that. So I think it's a great idea. I suggest actually having cards with you. So after your interview's done, maybe you can't do it right then, but like, you know, an hour later, you'll have some time. You can actually write the card when you're thinking about the employer. And you can pop it in the mail. It goes right in the mail, and you can send the email out also. So I really strongly encourage that.
Yeah. For those who attended the PIPSA interview panel on Tuesday, you heard that there are some varying opinions on this. I completely agree with Cynthia. I think you're always better served by having a thank you card, but that's because I'm never going to send a thank you card that doesn't sound generic or dull, or just saying it was nice to meet you. Boom. And if you can collect that information and put that in thank you cards, it's wonderful. One thing to do is as you go around the room and collect the business cards and they're right on the back of them. I think it's a good idea. I mean, if you're going around and collecting business cards anyways or materials, right when you walk away from the table, write down something unique about your conversation that you can mention in your thank you notes. And then when you're done, just sit right outside, write all your thank you notes, and pop them in.
And so I think for folks who are also just going for informational purposes, and maybe this will be a way that you think about folks who want to apply for next summer or as an externship or whatever, that whatever information you've gotten from meeting someone at a booth, you could put actually into an email note asking about information for an internship at a later point, right? So if you're actually really interested in the fall or the spring, you could send off an email and be like, hi, I met so-and-so at the booth today. This was like really interesting. I'm totally interested in an externship in the fall or the spring. Do you do that? Who would I get in contact with? And you can start that relationship right away too. So it doesn't just have to be thank yous for formal interviews for the summer.
For those who've been in my office and have needed the name particular for, you may have seen me pull out this binder that's filled with business cards, and it's you know, antiquated. It's an antiquated practice perhaps, but I think it's really helpful for you to really keep track of all your employers and just log them, the people that you're meeting with, how you met them. I have now the cards for every single volunteer coordinator that BBC has had for 3 years, and I've received 4 or 5 different people. But it really helpful, I think, information ultimately, so that I have as a record of contact, how to find out about opportunities and stay in touch with them to the extent you don't get the position and you want to maintain that contact so that you can find an internship for a fall, spring, or later semester. Or you, end up taking another position and just want to stay in touch with them anyways. They can be helpful resources for you in the future. So, we have a few minutes left. Thought we'd take any more questions. I'll briefly say that for those who are interested in finding out information about how to fund their public interest summer internships, the Public Interest Law Foundation, or PILF, is having an important general meeting next Tuesday at noon. And I encourage everybody to attend that meeting. PILF is a really great student group. They do an incredible amount of public interest awareness raising on campus. They raise the money to support a huge fundraiser that raises money to underwrite public interest summer internships and fall internships. And you have to be involved in PILF in order to get the benefit of one of the PILF grants. So I strongly encourage you to attend that event. That's going to be next Tuesday, February 5th at noon. Everybody ready for PIPS Day?
Oh, yeah.
Well, then I will see you all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Saturday morning. Thank you all for coming in. Please join me in thanking Cynthia and Hannah.